They called me sump, and they were right too. A sump is the low place in a machine where the filth collects so the rest of the works can keep turning. That was the job. I was the drain the battalion poured its terror into so the men could keep their hands steady on the rifles. I have been a lot of things since, but I have never been anything as honest as that. I want to tell it plain, the way it happened, because there are stories going around now that make us sound like saints, and we were not saints. We were tired people on a bad rock who found one thing the enemy could not do, and we did it until it killed most of us. That is the whole of it. Everything else is detail, and I will give you the detail because the detail is where the dead live. The rock was Kessler. You will not find it on the new maps. They renamed it after the way you rename a road where a child died. Back then, it was a frontier world 3 jumps past anywhere worth jumping to, a place of red grit and low scrub and a sky the color of a healing bruise. We had 11 settlements strung along the one habitable belt, and the biggest of them, Vance Down, was where they brought me when the gift showed itself. Though gift is a word I have never been able to say without my mouth going sour. I was an orphan, which is not a sad thing to say so much as a useful one. The program wanted orphans. They told us later it was because we had nobody to write home to, but I think the truth was simpler and worse. Nobody would come asking what they had done to us. I had been living rough in the maintenance tunnels under Vance Down, 12 years old and feral with it, lifting ration tabs and sleeping near the heat exchangers. That is where Cobb found me, and Cobb is where I have to start, because everything I know about the cost, I learned from watching it eat him. Cobb was the first burden bearer, old when I knew him, though I understand now he was maybe 40, which is a thing the gift does to you. It runs you like a candle burned at both ends and the middle. He lived down in the tunnels too, half mad, talking to people who were not there, and the colony fed him because every so often a panic would sweep the down market when a choir front got close, and Cobb would walk through the crowd touching wrists, and the panic would go out of the people and into him, and he would go and be sick in a corner and then go quiet for a day. The colonists thought he was a holy fool. He was just early. He was what I would become if I was lucky, and luckier men than me did not get to be Cobb. He caught me with my hand in his coat looking for tabs, and he held my wrist, and I felt the floor of myself drop out. I had always known I was wrong somehow, that crowds made me feel like a cup filling past the rim, that I could stand next to a frightened man and feel his fear crawl up my arm like a draft under a door. I had spent 12 years building walls against it. Cobb put his thumb on the inside of my wrist, and the walls came down, and I felt everything in him at once, all the terror he was carrying for the colony, and it was a black ocean, and I should have drowned. I did not drown. That was the thing. That was what made me valuable and what made me cursed. The black went into me, and I held it, and it hurt the way swallowing a coal hurts, but I held it, and Cobb looked at me with his rheumy old eyes going wide, and he said, "You are a deep one, aren't you?" He did not mean it kindly. He meant it the way a drowning man means it when he finds something that floats. The black has to come out. Nobody tells you that part in the stories. It manifests, is the clinical word they used later. It manifests as a fluid, dark and slick and stinking faintly of ozone and old pennies. It comes up out of you through the skin if you hold it long enough, weeping black from the pores of your forearms and your throat. And if you do not wash it off, it sinks back in and festers, and the festering is what kills you. Water takes it. Only water. Cobb taught me that on the first night, standing me under a maintenance drench shower in the dark with my clothes on, the freezing recycled water sluicing the black off me in ropes that swirled down the grate, and him saying over and over, all the way out, girl, all the way out, you leave any in and it grows. I have washed 10,000 times since, and I still hear him. All the way out. You leave any in and it grows. Major Bate Miller came for me a week after Cobb died. He died the way they all died, the way I expected to die. He took on a market panic too big, a real one, the day a choir scout breached the eastern wire and 40 people felt the dread hit them at once, and Cobb walked into the middle of it and pulled it all, and there was too much and he could not get it out fast enough. They found him in the tunnels with the black weeping out of every pore, gone solid, like a man dipped in tar, his eyes open. I washed him. It was the only thing I knew to do for him. The black would not come off a dead man. I learned that too. Miller was not what I expected from the program. I expected a soldier. She was a doctor, gray-haired and square and tired in a way that went past her body into wherever a person keeps themselves. And she sat across from me in a requisitioned office with Cobb's file on the desk between us, and she said, "I am sorry about the old man. He was the only one of you I ever got to grow old, and I am not going to lie to you and tell you that you will." I respected her for that. I have spent my life being lied to gently, and it is the gentleness I can't forgive. Miller never once lied to me gently. She told me what I was for, and what it would cost, and then she asked, which is more than the colony ever did, and I said yes, because I was 12 and alone, and she was the first person who had ever looked at the worst thing about me and called it useful. That was how I came into the 5. We were not 5 at first. We were never exactly 5. The number was an old joke about a recruiting officer who wanted a tidy program with a tidy name and got neither. People filtered in and out, washed out or burned out or got carried out, and at our strongest we were 9 and at the end we were 2. But somebody in an office a long way from Kessler had decided we were the 5, and the name stuck the way bad names do. The idea was a counterforce. The choir hunted by fear. We were the ones who could move fear around. Each of us did it a little differently. That was the thing they could never engineer out, the way the gift came up crooked in each of us, tuned to a different frequency, they liked to say, though I think they only said it because of our name. There was a boy named Adler who could take a single man's fear clean and quick, surgical, a battlefield mercy. There was a woman, Okonkwo, who could not take fear but could feel it, map it, tell you from 2 kilometers off where the dread was thickest and which way it was moving. There were others. And there was me, who could take more than was sane to take and hold it longer than was survivable, the deep one, the sump. We were children playing in a war that ate adults whole, and I would tell you we did not understand that, but we did. That is the part I cannot make people believe. We understood exactly. Children always do. Now I have to tell you about the choir, and I have been putting it off. The way you put off a thing you have spent your whole life trying not to look at directly. They came down out of the dark between the stars 11 years before I was born, and for the first decade nobody on Kessler ever saw one and lived, because they did not need to be seen to win. The first colony they took, Halloran's Rest, was found intact. That is the wrong word, but it is the word the relief team used in their report, and I have read the report. Intact. The dome unbreached, the lights on, the kettles still warm. 300 people sitting or lying where they had fallen, no marks on them, faces frozen in something the team could not name and so did not try to in their report. They had not been killed. They had been frightened to death, all of them at once, a fear so total and so sustained that their hearts had simply refused to go on doing the work of being alive. We worked out the rest in pieces over years, the way you work out the shape of a thing in a dark room by barking your shins on it. The choir are eyeless, not blind, eyeless, no eyes, no sockets, the front of the skull a smooth gray plate because they do not navigate by light. They navigate by us. They feel the electrical weather of a living nervous system, and the brightest, loudest, most unmistakable signal a nervous system makes is terror. We are never so visible as when we are afraid. To a choir, a frightened man on a dark planet shines like a flare. They home on it, and when they get close they sing the dread tone. The layered chord that is not sound at all but comes in through the back of the skull like sound. A wrongness so deep it stops being an emotion and becomes a physical fact, like cold, like falling. The colonists called the front of advancing dread the static, because that is what it felt like on the edges, a hiss under everything, the world going to snow. By the time you could feel the static you were already inside their hunting range. By the time you could feel the cord you were already dying. You want to know what makes them alien, truly alien, and not just men in masks. It is this: they feel no fear themselves. None. Okonkwo could not read them at all. To her they were holes in the world, places where the fear weather simply stopped, a dead calm in the middle of a hurricane. They have no concept of it. They feed on a thing they cannot experience. Imagine a creature that lives on a flavor it has no tongue to taste, that hunts a music it is stone deaf to, that has built its entire predatory life around an experience it will never once feel. That is the choir. They are connoisseurs of a terror they cannot imagine, and that, in the end, is the door we walked through. But I am getting ahead of the dead again. They do not like that. Let me go back. The grind. That is what the soldiers called the middle years, and it is the right word, the word for what happens when a war stops being a series of battles and becomes a kind of weather, a thing that erodes you. By the time I was grown, the front had taken 6 of the 11 settlements and was working west toward Vance down at the pace of a thing that knows it cannot be stopped and is in no hurry. The 5 had a doctrine by then, worked out in blood. When the static rose ahead of an advance, the regular soldiers would dig in, and one of us would go up to the line, and we would walk the trench pulling the fear out of the men as fast as it built, keeping their signals dim, keeping the choir from being able to pick the line out of the noise. A frightened battalion was a lit candelabra in a dark church. A battalion we had drained was a sheet of cold stone. They could not find what was not afraid. It worked, and it killed us. Of course it killed us. You cannot pour the fear of 1,000 men into one 20-year-old body and expect that body to keep its shape. Adler went first of my cohort, the surgical one, the gentle one. He took a wounded sergeant's terror during a night assault, and the sergeant was dying, and dying men feel everything, and it was too much, and Adler's heart did the thing the colonists at Halloran's Rest had done. It simply declined to continue, and he sat down in the mud with the black coming out of his ears, and he was gone before the medic reached him. We did not even get to wash him. The line was moving. I want to tell you about Mason now, because Mason is the reason I am alive to tell any of it, and because Mason is the thing the choir never understood about us until it was far too late. I met him on the worst night of the 3rd year, the night the eastern flank folded. I had been on the line 11 hours, which is roughly 8 hours longer than is survivable, and I was so full of other men's fear that I had stopped being able to tell which terror was theirs and which was mine, and I was weeping black down both arms and into my gloves, and I knew, the way you know weather, that the next big pull would be the one that solidified me. And the static was rising, and the cord was coming. And down the trench the men were starting to break, starting to shine, and I knew I had to pull, and I knew if I pulled I would die, and I had made my peace with that, more or less, the way you make peace with a thing by being too tired to fight it. And then there was a man beside me in the trench who was not afraid. I felt it before I saw him, the way you feel a window open in a hot room. Everywhere I turned my senses there was the roar of terror, the whole line of it screaming up at me, and in the middle of it was a single cool, quiet place, a man-shaped silence, and I turned, and there he was, mud to the eyebrows, a corporal's stripes, reloading with the bored competence of a man clearing a drain. I reached for him the way you reach for a railing in the dark, and there was nothing to take. He had no fear. Not suppressed, not hidden, not held down by training. Okonkwo confirmed it later. Ran every test the program had. Mason simply did not produce it. Some wiring the rest of us are born with, he was born without. The one signal the choir hunted by, he did not broadcast. To them he was as invisible as a drained line, all by himself, all the time, and he did not even know it was remarkable. He looked at me weeping black and shaking, and he said, "You're the sump then. You look like hell." And he handed me his canteen, not to drink. He had seen cob work years before in the down market. He knew what the water was for. He poured it slow over my forearms while I held the line's fear in, and he talked the whole time, low and flat and dull, about a card game, about a man who owed him money, about absolutely nothing. And the dullness of it was a thing to hold on to, a handrail in the dark, and the black ran off my arms and down into the trench mud, and I did not solidify, and the cord came and went over a line it could not read, and we lived. I do not have the words for what Mason was to me, and I have stopped looking for them. People want it to be a love story because people always want it to be a love story, and it makes me tired. It was not that. It was bigger and plainer than that. He was the one place in a screaming world where I could set the burden down for a minute. He was the cool quiet in the middle of the roar. When I was so full of other men's terror that I could not find my own self in it anymore, I would go and stand near Mason and there would be nothing coming off him. No fear to take, no signal to read, just a man, just the human fact of him. And in that silence I could remember who I was under all the freight. He kept me a person. That is a holy thing, and I will not cheapen it by calling it romance. The grind went on. The months were all the same month. The front came west at the pace of a thing in no hurry, and we drained the lines, and we washed the black off in drenched showers and in rain, and once, during the retreat from Tannehill, in a half-frozen reservoir while the cord moved across the water behind us. And I will give you one night of it so you understand the rest, because they really were all the same night, and the sameness is the thing nobody puts in the histories. Pelham's Ditch. That was the name of the line, a dry irrigation cut south of the Tannehill domes where command decided to make a stand because the ground channeled the choir's advance into a kill box, or so the map said. Maps did not know about the static. 200 men dug into a ditch at dusk, and Okonkwo up on the spoil bank reading the fear weather, and me beside her waiting, and Mason somewhere down the line with his board competence and his canteen. Okonkwo went still around midnight and said, "It's coming thick from the northeast, more of them than I've ever," and then she stopped, because she had hit the edge of where she could read, the dead calm, the holes in the world, and she said the thing she always said when the choir got close, which was, "I can't see them, Mara, I can only see where they aren't." The static rose. I felt the lines start to shine. 200 men, and the fear came up out of them the way water comes up through sand when you stand on a wet beach, slow at first and then all at once, and I went down the ditch on my hands and knees in the dark with my palms open, touching wrists, touching the backs of necks, pulling, and the black came up my arms in ropes faster than I could shed it. You learn a rhythm. Pull from 3 men, wipe the black off on your soaked sleeves, pull from 3 more, keep the whole line dim, keep them from shining up into the dark where the eyeless things were turning their smooth faces, hunting for the brightest terror and finding, where 200 men should have been blazing, only a long, low, cold smear of nothing. A boy grabbed my wrist instead of the other way round, a private no older than I had been in the tunnels, and he said, I can't, I'm going to run." And I took it out of him so fast and clean he sagged like a cut puppet, and he looked at me with the dumb gratitude of a man who has just had a tooth pulled, and he picked his rifle back up. That is what we were for, not to win the fight, to keep 200 men from shining while they fought it. We held Pelham's Ditch till dawn, and we lost it anyway, the way we lost everything, by inches, falling back to the next cut and the next, and I came off that line so full I could not remember my own name until Mason found me and stood near me and let his silence give it back. But we held it till dawn, and the men who held it are mostly still alive, and that is the only kind of victory the grind ever gave us, the kind where the scoreboard says you lost and the graves say otherwise. We lost Okonkwo at a cut called the Thrashing Floor 2 months later, and I have to tell it because she was the gentlest of us and because of how it happened. She could read fear from 2 kilometers off, every flicker of it, the whole battlefield laid out in her head like weather on a glass, every flicker except the choir themselves, who were holes, dead calm, nothing. So when a flanking party came around the western spur, 12 of them moving through a draw, Okonkwo did not see 12 enemies. She saw a patch of perfect quiet, an absence of fear where the scrub should have been thin with the low background dread of small animals, and her gift, which had kept us alive 100 times by reading the storm, was the one gift on the planet that went blind in the calm. She walked toward the quiet because the quiet looked safe. The safest place on a battlefield to Okonkwo was the place with no fear in it, and the place with no fear in it was the place the choir were standing. I felt her go. From half a kilometer off, I felt one bright, clean spike of terror flare up and then snuff out, the way a struck match dies in the dark, and I knew before the runner reached us. We could not even get to her body for a day. When we did, there were no marks on her. Intact. The word that was always the wrong word. Miller knelt by her a long time and then took out her list and wrote the date. We lost the others 1 and 2 at a time, and Miller grew grayer and quieter and kept the list she would not show me, the names of the ones she had recruited and buried, and I found out after that she had written each of our names on it the day she signed us, with a blank space for the date, so she would never be tempted to pretend any of us were going to make it. I should tell you about the crash, because it is the night I learned what the gift could do that nobody had planned for, and because it is the night Jimmy started. We were being pulled back from the Tannehill line in a dropship, 11 of us, Mason and me, and a squad of regulars and Miller and a pilot named Rays, running low and dark over the scrub to stay under the choir's hunting field. You stay low because the dread front rises. It pools in the high places and the open sky, and down in the scrub the static is thinner. But the front had moved faster than intelligence said, and we flew straight into the edge of it at 200 meters, and the cord hit the cabin all at once, every soul aboard lighting up like a torch, every soul but Mason, and mine, which was already so scarred and calloused with use that I felt the dread come in like a familiar cruelty, an old dog that bites you every day. The pilot Rays felt it and his hands locked. That is what the cord does at full strength. The body simply stops taking orders. The ship nosed over, and I did the thing I had only ever done slow and careful in a trench. I did it fast and wild and across a whole cabin at once. I reached out and pulled. I pulled the fear out of Ray's mid-fall, ripped it out of him like a tooth, and his hands came back to life and he hauled us level 4 meters off the scrub and we did not all die. But I had pulled too fast and too dirty and there was too much. 11 people's terror dumped into me in 3 seconds, and I felt the black come up not in ropes but in a flood, felt it filling my chest, felt my own heart start to do the Halloran's Rest thing, the slow refusal, and the last thing I remember of the crash is Mason's face, his quiet, fearless face, the only calm thing in a world made of screaming, and his voice saying my name, my real name, the one nobody used. Mara. Mara, stay, all the way out, leave none in. We came down hard, but we came down level, and most of us walked away, and Mason dragged me to a stream and put me in it face down and held me there, while the black bled out of me into the current, gray water going black, going gray again, for the better part of an hour, until I could hold my own head up. And that is the night I learned that I could pull from more than one man at once, that the limit was not the number of people but the amount of fear, that I was not a drain after all but a vessel, and a vessel can be filled past the brim, and it can also, I would come to understand much later, be poured out. But first, Jimmy. The squad of regulars on that dropship, one of them did not get pulled in time. A young soldier, barely older than I had been when Cobb caught me, and the cord had him at full strength for the whole fall because I had been busy keeping the pilot's hands alive. When we mustered the survivors at the stream, he was sitting apart, very calm, too calm, and when Miller went to him she came back with her face gone wrong. He's empty, she said. There's nothing left in him to take. She meant his fear was gone, burned out, but it was worse than that, and we did not understand how much worse for a long time. What we eventually understood is this. The choir, when they take a colony, do not always kill. Sometimes they hollow. They flood a mind with the cord until the fear in it is not killed, but the program's word was entrained, until the person stops generating their own fear and starts simply resonating with the choir's, a tuning fork struck and left ringing, a human relay station for the dread. A hollowed man broadcasts the cord. He spreads the static ahead of the advance. He becomes a part of their hunting field, a piece of them wearing a human face, and the worst of it is that he can talk and walk and remember your name and use it. Jimmy was the name of that soldier on the dropship. He did not go hollow all at once. The cord had only gotten partway in before I cut the fall short, and so Jimmy walked among us for months, getting quieter and colder and emptier, until one night he simply walked east out of the camp, toward the front, the way a compass needle finds north, and the next time we saw him he was standing in the static 100 meters ahead of a choir advance with the cord pouring out of him, and he looked at us across that field of dread with a face that knew exactly who we were, and he smiled. You hear stories about the choir advance now and they all want a monster, a great alien terror at the front of the army, and there were the choir themselves, God knows, eyeless and gray and worse than any monster the storytellers invent. But the thing that broke men's nerve worst was Jimmy, because Jimmy was one of ours. Because the dread came at us wearing a boy's face, calling out across the line in a voice we knew, calling men by their names, telling them to lie down, telling them it didn't hurt, that he could feel them shining, that the singing wanted them. He was the proof of what waited. Mason was the man with no fear who was our salvation. Jimmy was the man with no fear who was our damnation. And they were the two ends of the same terrible string. And I have lain awake more nights than I can count over the fact that the only difference between them was which side reached the empty room first. We could not fight Jimmy. You cannot drain a man who has no fear to drain. You cannot frighten a man who has been emptied of the capacity. Twice I went up the line against him, and I want to put both times down plainly, because the second is where the whole of it turns, though I did not know it then. The first time was at the relief of Cord's Mill, where the choir had a settlement half encircled, and Jimmy stood out in the open ground between the lines, broadcasting, 100 meters of churned dirt and the rising static between him and our trench. I went up to drain our line and keep the defenders dim, and I felt him out there the way you feel a cold spot in deep water, and against every order I climbed the parapet and started across the open ground toward him, because I thought, God help me, that I could pull him back. That somewhere in the hollow boy there was still fear I could take, and if I took it the relay would break. I got within 30 meters. I reached for him with everything the gift had in it, reached down into him the way Cobb had reached into me, and there was nothing there to take, not suppressed, not buried. Gone, scoured, a clean dry socket where a person used to keep their terror, and pouring up out of that emptiness was the cord, cold and patient, and it nearly had me on my knees in the open before Mason came over the parapet after me, the one man it could not find, and dragged me back by the collar while Jimmy watched with the smooth, mild, eyeless patience of the things he served. The second time was 8 months on, the front gone west, and by then Jimmy was less a man and more a part of their weather, and he no longer stood in the open. He stood in the heart of the static where the cord was thickest, and to get near him you had to wade through a depth of dread that would stop a regular soldier's heart at 50 meters. I waded in. I had so much fear in me by then, so many years of it banked down in the deep place, that the choir's cord was just one more cold layer on top of an ocean of cold, and I could go where no one else could go, and I went, and I stood close enough to see the boy's face under the thing wearing it. He looked at me across the static and he said, in the boy's voice, "You keep us so full, Sump. Everything you take, you keep." He said it almost kindly. "You're the fullest thing on this whole rock," he said, "and you walk around half a person trying to wash it off, and you never once think to put it where it would do some good." He meant it as a taunt, I thought then, the dead boy's mouth made into an instrument of the things that emptied him. I have come to think it was the truest thing anyone ever said to me, and that some last drowned ember of the soldier he had been, some flicker too deep for the choir to scour out, was using the only minute it would ever get to tell me how to win. Everything you take, you keep, so give it back. But that is the kind of thing you only understand later, when the dead have had time to arrange themselves into a meaning, and I turned and waded back out through the dread and left him standing in it. And I did not understand, and good men died in the 8 months it took me to understand, and I carry that too. The front reached the outskirts of Vance down in the 5th year, and that is the last movement, and I will not pretty it up. We had nowhere left to fall back to. Vance down was the last settlement on the habitable belt. Behind it was the deep desert and then nothing, and 40,000 civilians, and the last regiments, and Mason and Miller and me, the whole of what was left of the five. Command's plan was an evacuation that everyone knew was a fiction. There were not enough ships, and there was not enough time, and the static was already rising over the eastern domes. The world going to snow. The colonists in the down market starting to shine with the first thin terror of the end. Jimmy was out there at the front of it, and behind Jimmy the choir, more of them than we had ever seen massed. A gray tide come to do to Vance down what they had done to Halloran's Rest, to leave it intact, lights on, kettles warm, 40,000 frightened to death in their beds. I had it by then, the understanding. It had been growing in me since the crash, since Jimmy's taunt, the way the black grows in you if you leave any in. A vessel can be filled past the brim and a vessel can be poured out. Everything I take, I keep. 5 years of other men's terror, the panic of 1,000 trench lines, the dread of the dropship, Cobb's Black Ocean from the night he caught a feral child stealing tabs. I had washed and washed and washed, and still, somewhere down in the deep place that made me the sump, it was all still there. You leave any in and it grows. I had a lifetime of fear in me, more terror than any single mind on any world had ever held by the one nervous system built crooked enough to hold it. And out there at the front was an army of creatures that had never felt afraid, that fed on a thing they could not imagine, that were connoisseurs of a music they were stone deaf to. I told Miller. I told her all of it, the plan, what it would do, what it would cost, and Miller, who had never once lied to me gently, did not lie to me then either. She did not tell me it would work. She did not tell me I would live. She got out her list, the one she had never shown me, and she showed it to me. All the names with their dates, Cobb and Adler and Okonkwo and the others, and the blank space by my name, and she said, I have written too many of these. She put her pen down on the blank space. And then she picked it up again and put it away, because she was a doctor, and the thing about a doctor is they will let you do the brave, stupid, necessary thing. They just will not pretend it is anything other than what it is. Mason did not argue either. I had thought he would, I had braced for it. But Mason understood me better than I understood myself, the way the silence understands the noise. He said one thing. He said, you'll need to get close. To the center of them, past Jimmy. And I said yes, and he said, you can't read your way through that field, the static, the cord, it'll have you down before you're halfway. And I said I knew. And he said, but it can't read me. And there it was, laid out flat between us in the way of two people who have stopped being able to lie to each other. They could not read Mason. He had no fear to shine. He could walk through the heart of the static like a man crossing an empty room, and the choir would not feel him coming, and he could carry me. I said no. I said it a lot of ways, loud and then quiet and then begging, which is a thing I had not done since I was 12. And Mason, fearless Mason, the cool silence at the center of every screaming thing, just shouldered his rifle and his pack and looked at me with the boredom of a man clearing a drain, and he said, you kept me a person, Sump. All those years. You don't even know you did it. Standing near me so you could remember your own self. He said, I've never had the thing you all have, the fear, and people think that's a gift. And it isn't, it's a kind of deafness. You go through the whole war and you never once feel what the other men feel. You're alone in the only way that matters. He said, except near you. When you'd come stand by me, full up of everybody's terror, I could feel it coming off you, just a little leaking out, and it was the only time I ever knew what they all knew. The only time I wasn't deaf. He said, so don't tell me I don't understand what I'm carrying you into. I've wanted to feel it my whole life. He almost smiled. Let me feel it once where it counts. We went out before dawn, the two of us, into the static. There is a thing that happens to the body before a thing like that, and nobody warns you, and I will warn you. You do not feel brave. You feel like a tool being carried to a job. Miller had drained the last of the program stores into me to keep my heart going under the load I was about to take. And Mason had checked his rifle the way he checked it every morning, bored, competent. A man clearing a drain. And the two of us walked out past the last wire of Vance down while behind us 40,000 people slept or did not sleep in the rising snow of the dread. And I remember thinking that the whole weight of it, every one of those 40,000, was about to come down through me. And that I had spent my entire life being made ready for exactly one morning, and here it was. And I did not feel brave. I felt used, in the oldest and best sense of the word, the sense in which a tool is honored by being used for the thing it was forged for. I have tried many times to describe what it was to walk into that field, and I cannot do it, and I have stopped trying to do it well. It was the world ending in slow motion all around us, the snow rising, the cord building from a hiss to a pressure to a physical wrongness that bent the light and made the scrub seem to crawl. The ground itself felt afraid. That is the closest I can come. Not me, the ground, the air, the bruise-colored sky. Everything that was not the choir seemed to flinch and cower. And through it walked Mason, upright, ordinary, the one untouched thing, and the choir did not feel him. And clinging to his back with my arms around his neck and my face against the cool quiet of him, I was a passenger in the only safe place on the planet, the one man-shaped hole in the hunting field. I could feel his heartbeat against my chest, slow, even, a man's pulse in a place that had no business holding a living thing, and I matched my own breathing to it and went in. They were all around us in the half-light, gray and eyeless and tall, taller than a man, the smooth plates of their faces turning, sensing a world full of distant, frightened colonists, and not one bit of terror in the two soldiers walking through their center. Because Mason had none and I had it all locked down so deep, and held so hard that for the first time in my life nothing leaked. Not a drop. The sump sealed shut, going in. We passed close enough to one that I could have reached out and touched the gray plate where its eyes should have been. It did not turn. We were a quiet it could not hear, walking through the middle of its choir. Jimmy was at the heart of them. Of course he was. The relay, the broadcaster, the boy's body strung between the army and the front, pouring out the cord. He felt us when we got close, not our fear. There was none to feel. But the sheer wrongness of two bodies where the field said there should be panic and there was silence. And he turned that smooth, empty, smiling face toward us and he said, in the boy's voice, "Sump, you came all this way to give it back." And I understood that he had known, all along since the taunt at the line, that somewhere in the drowned dark of him, the soldier he had been was still screaming and had spent his last self trying to tell me the way home. Everything you take, you keep. So give it back. I let go of Mason. I stood in the center of the choir, in the eye of the dread, surrounded by the gray tide of creatures that had crossed the dark between stars to feed on a terror they could not imagine, that had never once in the long history of their kind felt the thing they hunted, and I opened the sump. I want to be exact about what came out of me, because it was not a weapon, not in any way the word means. It was a life. It was Cobb's black ocean from the night he caught a feral child in the tunnels. It was the boy at Pelham's ditch who said, "I can't. I'm going to run." It was Ray's in the falling dropship and the 11 souls in that cabin and the long cold smear of 200 men in a ditch at dawn. It was Okonkwo's one bright spike snuffing out in the dark, which I had felt from half a kilometer and never let go of, because I never let go of any of it. It was every wrist I had ever touched in every trench in 5 years, every man's worst minute taken into me and held, all of it banked down in the deep place that made me the sump, and behind it, scooped up whole in the last instant before we passed the wire, the rising terror of 40,000 people who did not want to be frightened to death in their beds with the kettles still warm. I had spent my whole life learning to pull fear in and hold it and let it out slow and safe down a drench shower grate, one careful rope at a time, all the way out, leave none in. I had never once let it all out at all at once and on purpose and into something that could receive it. I stood in the heart of the choir and I poured it out, the whole accumulated terror of a species under siege, channeled through the one nervous system on the planet built to bear it, into 1,000 minds that had no defense because they had no concept, that had never built a wall against fear because they had never once in a million years needed one. Deaf men who suddenly, all at once, in the eye of their own hunting field, could hear. I do not know what fear is to a thing that has never felt it. I think it must be like a color you have been told about your whole life, and then are made to see for the first time. Except the color is screaming, and there is no name for it and no bottom to it, and no way to wash it off because they had no water and no cob and no fearless friend to pour the canteen. No 5 years of learning to hold it. Nothing. Just the raw full flood of it hitting minds that had spent 1 million years as predators and had built nothing, nothing at all, to survive being prey. The cord broke. Not faded, broke, snapped. The layered tone shattering into 1,000 separate screams as 1,000 creatures that had never feared felt every terror of a besieged human world arrive in them at once with no way to put it down. They ran. The choir who did not run, who advanced at the pace of a thing that cannot be stopped, who had taken 6 settlements without ever once breaking stride, they broke. They scattered into the dawn scrub, clawing at the smooth gray plates of their faces, and where they had been a tide they were a rout, and the static collapsed, and 40,000 people in Vance Down felt the dread go out of the air like a held breath finally let go. And behind me the last regiment saw the gray tide turn and run, and they did the thing soldiers do. They went after it. And that is the part the storytellers love, and it is the least important part, and I will not give it to you. The war turned that morning. People remember the morning the choir ran from Kessler. They put it in the histories. Here is what the histories leave out, and what I have come all this way to tell you. It went both ways. The sump is a drain and a vessel, and I had learned to pour out, but I had not learned, because there was no learning it, that when you empty yourself that completely into 1,000 receiving minds, the channel runs both directions for an instant, and what they were came back up the line into me. The deafness of them, the eyeless cold, the 1,000,000 years of a thing that hunts and never fears, the absolute alien zero of it. It poured into me as their fear poured into them, and where they could not bear the fear, I could not bear the nothing, and I went down in the scrub in the gray dawn with the choir screaming and running all around me, and the black did not come up out of my pores this time. There was no black. There was nothing. They had given me their nothing, and I had no way to wash it off, because you cannot rinse away an absence. Mason carried me out. I do not remember it. I remember nothing of 3 days. He carried me back through the route, back across the scrub, back to Vance Down where the kettles were still warm and the lights were still on, and the 40,000 were, for the first time in 5 years, not afraid. He carried me to a stream, the way he always did, and he put me in the cold water and held me, but there was no black to bleed out, and so he just held me in the cold until I started, very slowly, to come back, to fill back up, the sump remembering how to be a thing that holds. I came back. That is the cost, the way the cost always lands, sideways and on someone else. I came back. Mason did not. 3 days he carried me. 3 days through the rout of a broken alien army, fearless. The one man it could not find. And on the 3rd day a single scattered choir, blind with the terror I had given it, ran across our path in the scrub, and there was no fear in Mason for it to home on, but there were hands and claws, and it was on us before either of us knew. And Mason put himself between it and the unconscious thing on his back, which was me, and he did not feel afraid. He never once in his life felt afraid, and I have to believe that means it did not hurt the way it would have hurt me, that he went into the dark the way he did everything, with the bored competence of a man clearing a drain. They told me after that, when they found us, I was alive on the bank of the stream where he had set me down, and he was between me and the scrub, and there was no fear on his face because there had never been any fear in him to put there. The one mercy of his deafness. He died not knowing the thing the rest of us spend our lives drowning in. I washed him. It was the only thing I knew to do for him, the way it had been the only thing I knew to do for Cobb. The black would not come off Cobb because the black needs a living vessel to weep from, and there had never been any black in Mason at all, so there was nothing to wash. And I knelt in the cold stream and poured the canteen over a man who had no fear and never had, washing nothing off him, all the way out, leaving none in, and I understood that the washing had never really been about the black. It had been about having a thing to do with your hands while you let someone go. They renamed the world after. Renamed Vance down, put up a stone with the names on it, Cobb and Adler and Okonkwo and the rest, and a separate stone for Mason that calls him a hero, which he was, though he would have found the word tiring. They wanted to put my name on a stone too, for a while, when they thought I had died out in the scrub, and Miller told me later she had almost let them, almost given them the blank space on her list to fill, because she thought it might be kinder to let me be a name on a stone than a woman who had to keep being the sump. But I lived, and so I am not on the stone, and that is its own kind of weather, being the one left to do the remembering. I still have it all in me. The 1,000 trench lines, the down market, the dropship, the 40,000. The nothing the choir poured back. I wash, and there is no getting it all the way out, and I have stopped trying because I have understood at last what Cobb meant and what Jimmy meant and what the whole terrible gift was for. Everything you take, you keep. It is not a curse. It is a kind of carrying. Somebody has to be the low place where it collects so the rest of the works can keep turning. Somebody has to hold the fear of 40,000 frightened people so they can sleep at night not knowing what it cost. I held it then and I hold it now. And on the bad nights when the nothing comes up in me, the eyeless cold, the million years of a thing that never feared, I go out to the stream where Mason set me down, and I stand in the cold water. And I do not wash anything off because there is nothing left to wash. And I remember the one place in a screaming world where I could set the burden down, and I pick it back up, and I carry it. That is the whole of it. That is what we were and what it cost and why the choir ran. Not because we were braver. We were not braver, we were terrified, all of us, the whole time, every day, which is the entire point. They were the ones who had never been afraid. We won because a human being can carry a thing too heavy to carry and keep walking, and can, at the very end when there is nothing else left, give it back. They were connoisseurs of a music they were deaf to. We made them hear it. And it broke them, because they had spent 1,000,000 years feasting and had never once thought to learn how to bear the meal. I am old now, the way the gift makes you old, candle burned at every end. I do not have many washings left in me. But when I go, I want it understood that I was not a saint and not a hero on a stone. I was the sump. I was the low place where the filth collected. And there is no honester thing a person can be, on a bad rock in a long war, than the one who is willing to hold what the others cannot, and not put it down, and not pretend it is light and carry it anyway, all the way out, leaving none in.